Never, if I'm honest with myself, I didn't think that that was going to be possible with them. I thought they would always be a version of Oracle. And Oracle's another one. How many people here, I'm sorry if I'm insulting anybody by saying Oracle, but Oracle's the one that has a certain reputation in the market. If you like it, you're going to love working there. If you don't, you're never going to consider Oracle, but it's very polarizing. So finish it up with, those are all some things we can talk about, but I like to make sure that we write all this stuff down to make sure that people can consume it. I also have a couple of other things I like to talk about when you're pushing organization forward. One is you need to say something 7 times before you've said it once, and you need to say something 7 times before someone understands it and has really synthesized it. So that's 49 times you need to say something. So you're going to repeat yourself a lot. Write it down, do all hands, speak in front of people, do some videos, give many different modes to communicate these things, but keep doing it. Systematic review, refresh is needed, which means that if you say that you are a thing or want to be a thing at some point, that's cool. Review it, make sure it still applies, and if it doesn't, throw it away. These things are not written in stone. They should never be written in stone. They should serve for points of time and context. Continue to iterate and up to the right. Just your organization is an engineered system. Engineer the system, but continue to make it better over time. But don't try to make it perfect and then set and forget. You should constantly need to refresh it and keep looking after it. I very much believe in leadership and management training. Young executives, I encourage to find mentors, to get coaches. If you took VC money, hit them up, make sure you get some advice from them. And understand the advice from a VC is going to be contextual too, because they're going to want you to drive towards a certain outcome. Just understand what that context looks like, but find people to help you. And if you're leading an organization, get management training, get some mentors in, get some coaches, sprinkle them throughout the organization, get people from your network that can come and help them. I very much believe in management training. And at the very minimum, setting a standard for what management will look like, one-on-ones, and all the basics type of stuff, but just make sure you're doing that and helping people understand what that looks like. And the last one is the rewarding the examples of what you want your culture to look like. This is an important point to kind of drive home, which is each decision is is an opportunity to course correct. Every meeting can have a positive or negative outcome, and each time if you're kind of going in flippantly to any sort of a meeting, you could have a very negative outcome that could last for years, or a decision you make at this point can last for years too. Similarly, if you make someone senior developer or make someone VP or manager or whatnot that has a whole bunch of bad traits that you really don't want to reinforce, you've implicitly reinforced those traits by putting that person in that position. I take this one incredibly seriously. It's important on the IC side as you go up the ladder, but it's incredibly important on the leadership side. And it's a very difficult one because none of us are perfect and we all have flaws, but you have to ask yourself, am I okay with that person's flaws for the context? Because what we're effectively doing is saying, we're okay with those types of flaws in our organization. So the takeaways, I have 2 quotes that I use quite liberally. This is my favorite one. Organizations that talk about people tend to be more toxic than the ones that talk about ideas. And I think this quote really captures this. If you ever find yourself in a conversation constantly talking about people, reframe it. What are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to do? What was the problem? What broke down? Well, Jane said this and Tommy said that. Nope, no, that's not what it was. We had a miscommunication about core principles. That's what we're talking about. How do we get better at that? The other one is, again, going back to the culture one, which is as a leader in your organization, you set the tone and the standard. What I like to say here, and I said this at the last 4 or 5 jobs I had, is I, as usually the head of, need to set tone and standard. And the most important thing I can take every day is to realize that the worst version of me will become the high watermark for an organization. So my worst day literally becomes likely the highest that the organization is going to see as possible. So if I happen to be one of these people that just goes huge peaks and then these terrible valleys where I flip tables and I throw things and whatnot, that is implicitly become acceptable. And I take that incredibly seriously. I love to have my highs, but I really try to temper any sort of lows. And if I need to, I'm going for a walk, or I'm going to the gym, or I'm doing something where no one's going to see me in my frustration, because I can't let that get out. So a whole bunch of fun slides that kind of go into why we do what we do, but the one I really want to, I do want to talk about this one. This is to avoid the hype. I really encourage you all to make sure that you keep one thing in front of you when you're asking yourself what you want to be, where you want to go, how you want to do it, which is context. It matters. Anyone familiar with Ruby on Rails in that community? There's someone famous in the Ruby on Rails community named David Heinemeier Hansen, very famous, invented Rails, has a company. They love to give advice, and they give it in such a way that it is framed as this is the only way. It's kind of a gospel, feels very religious. The tone is such that this is it. However, there's a very specific, narrow context by which that advice applies. The company that they work for is about, I think, 55 people. It hits a certain revenue. They never want to grow bigger than that. They have taken no VC funding. Quite literally doesn't apply to so many different contexts. That advice is very helpful if you understand the context by which it was given, but it is incredibly unhelpful if you think it applies to everybody. So avoid the hype. Understand. This last one is another one I like to point out. There's a concept that we like to talk about in tech, which is we're a family. Inside of organizations, we're families and whatnot. I don't love that framing because some of us have very dysfunctional families that we have to put up with. And I find that if you use that family framing, it doesn't really capture what you're trying to go for, which is we're teams. I mean, everyone knows that. I mean, this is the framing of family versus team. I go home at Christmas to see my family because that's what you do. You go home at Christmas to see your family, but 3 days is enough. I am gonna leave, but I have teams of people who I'm closer to, I talk to more often than my family. But if we disagree, I'd be like, whatever, I disagree with you, it's cool. We're working on this project together, it's fine, I respect you too. I also don't have history where you literally beat me up as a child because you're my brother or something like this. Those things, teams are more appropriate. People understand the concept of team much more than family and how it can apply to work contexts. I find the family framing in a work context really makes this a harder conversation than it needs to be. And I always like to end presentations with Soundwave because he's my favorite transformer. But happy to answer questions, go into depth about any of these things with the context that, or the caveat that my context might not be yours. I'd be a hypocrite if I did not say that.
I had one quick question. I found out, based on your slide, you're talking about training and speed, and that's actually one of the problems I personally run through with my teams is there's so much pressure to get the software and get the developed out there and tested, and then training comes along and they're like, it's causing tension. It's like, do I really have to do this? Any comments on that? Repeat the question?
So you're training me to repeat the question. Speed versus training, whether or not they're, what my thoughts might be on it, whether or not they also might be kind of mutually exclusive and whatnot. You're going to be a thing and do a thing and aspirationally drive towards a thing and kind of stick true to that. And to deviate from that takes exceptional circumstances. And you have to say, is this an exceptional circumstance typically in those cases? So I like to talk about that quite a bit because not the training one, but just that set what you're going to do, set a course and a direction, and it'll take an exceptional circumstance to knock you off course or deviate from the plan. Because most things in the moment feel exceptional, but really are not. And it usually takes a different kind of context or vantage point to recognize that it's not. And you usually lack it if you're in the moment, but somebody even close to you in the same organization can say, no, it's cool, just move on, or keep doing that. I find that when I'm sanity checking myself as an example in engineering or product, I really need someone who's very far away from me, so I typically go to sales and I say, this is a thing I'm seeing, is it real? I'm like, not important from our context, move on.
So you mentioned about your lowest point is the highest point your team can achieve in the work context.
I say it's the highest point I can reasonably expect them to. The lowest point in my day, or my lowest worst day, is the high point for an organization.
Yeah.
I like to say that it's what I can reasonably expect them to do because I've set a standard and a tone.
But the flip side is authentic, right? You being authentic to people around you by not showing your lowest state, by not showing the personal, any organization, especially startup, up down. If you don't show your low side, your disappointment.
Sure. So
how you build the relationship that is trustworthy.
So I guess the question was, would I be authentic in that case if I was not showing my low point? I believe I am, because I can still express and say that, hey, I'm frustrated and whatnot, and I'm having a bad day. And I've walked into meetings where I've said, just so you know, I'm having a terrible day. So let's set that tone here. But setting context for like, I'm having a bad day, this is a low point, is very different than throwing a telephone across a room and saying that's acceptable. That's just not an acceptable thing. So there's degrees that happen there too. So I believe you can show your authentic self in a way that is true, but you don't have to throw telephones. And I like to use that example because I had a telephone thrown across the room once in an architecture discussion where someone said, you just don't goddamn get it. I'm like, cool, so we're throwing telephones now if we disagree with schemas. That's now the standard. And it wasn't unheard of for things to get broken in that office because that is exactly what happened. The worst I've ever felt about myself was with somebody who I still consider a mentor, and I talk every couple of months. We worked together about 15 years ago, and genuinely kind human being, had high expectations, incredibly smart, really pushed people. And I remember I made a really boneheaded decision, and this guy's name was Bob, and Bob just looked at me and goes, kind of disappointed. I was like, holy shit, that's like a knife right here type of deal. He left the company, and the CEO that took over was what I call a table banger. And this guy got angry. He started banging tables, throwing bottles, flipping things. And I remember thinking to myself, this guy's a clown. This literally is setting a tone for this company, and he's just not someone I'm going to follow, but also just, he's a nobody. He's a clown, you know? And I think about that quite a bit because I think you were saying that relationships last past jobs. I say the same thing, something similar, which is reputations last longer than projects. And
I knew somebody got hit by that recently.
And if you think about those things, you can drive to outcome in a positive way, or you can drive to outcome in a negative way. They don't have to be, again, there's a spectrum in there. But think that this is a small valley, small industry. You're going to change jobs. You're going to meet people. You're going to work with them in various partnership modes. Find ways to politely and diplomatically get things done. I think it's Churchill that said that the diplomacy is the art of telling someone to go to hell and them asking for directions. It's a skill, but it's a skill you can learn.
I want to build on something you said. If you're having a bad day or you have to blow off steam, freely admit that. You'd be surprised how many people are feeling the same way. You can even send an example down that path of off steam. For instance, I go to the gym to off steam, and as you can tell, I probably blow off a lot of steam. So it's good to set the example. Say, I'm having a bad day. I have to go take care of this. Admit it. It might be helping someone else out on your team or anywhere.
I think there's a hand over there. So the question was ownership. How does it break down over team boundaries, and then how do we break down into teams, and like how they might be organized and whatnot. And this is more of the art of organizational design, in my opinion, because there is, I like to say that I think in Duplo, not even Lego anymore, because I think in very large blocks these days. But there's still an art to how you organize and how you do that. And I know no better teacher than experience to see how things are done, and it's an unfortunate one, but I try to pass that on. In my context, what I have always tried to do is reduce the number of external team dependencies so that more teams can control the outcome themselves. And obviously context in this case matters too, how big the teams, how big the projects, and all that sort of stuff. But I walked into a situation once where there was 18 teams of 2 who each controlled a component of a system. And to get anything out the door took some manner of circling 5 to 8 teams in there. And you can imagine what happened in that situation. Quite literally, nothing was released to production for 2 years. So the first thing I did was almost the exact opposite of what many people are told to do, which is I watched several projects. I asked about their dependency graphs. I circled them. I saw 5 teams that looked like they roughly were supposed to be one team. I said, you all are one team now, and with one backlog, one roadmap, whatever that be. Let's see how this works out. I call it an experiment. All organizational design is an experiment. Some things will work, some things won't. And I said, we're optimizing for one thing here. We need to get shipping again. We need to get some stuff into production. And I think that's kind of the art of organizational design, is figuring out how to do stuff like that and looking for those. So I look for dependencies. I look for cross-team communication that happens a lot. I look for boundary issues where something is going over a wall and there's